Welcome back to the next episode, episode 6. Today, I'm going to be putting these sleeves onto the chandelier, and that's just to hold the lamp holder, the resin printed lamp holder, just to make sure that they don't fall down onto the U-bend of that arm, or those arms. And over here, I'm making the pole that holds the chandelier to the roof. So I'm soldering a little bit of 2mm copper pipe that's been curled around the bottom of this pipe here, this brass 4mm pipe, and I'm going to clean that off, cut it off, and it's going to go inside here like this. So now you can probably sort of understand my reasoning and thinking around this a little bit better. So that thing that was flowering open, that's essentially what it was for. It's a knuckle socket, a socket to be able to take this the ceiling mount. So I've printed a few of these little lamp holders, and although they're printed, you don't have to print them. They're quite simple shapes. You could easily make them out of pipe, plastic pipe, or other materials. And as you can see, that's not soldered on, but it does hold that in place, in the right place on the arm. What I'm going to do at the moment is put a magnet onto this little ceiling pole. So I need a magnet there to attach it, and I need something to stop the magnet from coming off, which is what I'm going to use this old thing for. So I'm going to salvage a piece off the end of that and use this neodymium magnet. You've got to be really careful with these because they stick to everything that's metal. Really strong stuff. But you've got to be even more careful when you're soldering next to these, because a little bit of heat and it'll completely destroy the magnetic properties of this ring. So I need to keep this away from the heat while I'm soldering it. So I'm just going to attach a tiny little washer, if you like, to the end there. And eventually sand it flat so that it's flush with the magnet. And I'm going to try not to lose this one. Right, I know there's a lot of detail in these videos, and a lot of you probably don't want to see every little step that I take. So if there's too much details in my video, let me know so I can cut them down and get to more of the point, if you know what I mean. If you prefer the details, or if you don't, let me know. I'm putting a cocktail stick in the end of this pipe, and I think since doing this and doing it with the arms of the chandelier, I would recommend this is the best way to do it. I'm recommending that something goes into the pipe to prevent the solder from going in there. And the solder did go into the arms of the chandelier. Probably about 2 or 3 of them had solder, and I had to go to some length to dig that out. So it was either by putting a wire in there, or by heating it up, or by drilling it, and all sorts of things. So I don't want that to happen again. I would go crazy if that happens again. So I don't want to do that. So I think it's going to be much easier to dig out burnt wood from the inside of this than it is solid metal. Now, if I was making these to sell, that is something essential that I would need to know before going ahead and doing this. I'd need to know all the bits, all the processes, all the pros and cons. I'd need to know it all. And that's why it's essential to make these one-offs. It's really a sketch model which helps me understand all the processes involved in making these things. And we can only anticipate so far ahead with design. So you can only imagine the next few steps. I think, okay, if you're a mega genius, you could probably imagine or anticipate a lot further ahead. But I think most of us, we know how far ahead we can anticipate, and it's difficult to know every little potential outcome. Just let the cocktail stick burn out. It won't cause any harm. I will need to sand the end on that. As you can see, I kept that magnet away from that flame. And I'm even now that it's hot, the end is hot, and I'm reluctant to have the magnet sit at that end. But it does cool down quite quick. So I can just place it, if I can get the stick out of this, which is proving to be a little bit more tricky than I imagined. But as you can see, I'm using a dental pick to try and pull that piece of wood out of there, because it's charred and burnt wood, but of course the carbon and debris outside has sort of compressed, and that's what's causing it to not just pop out. But it should be a lot easier than digging out solder. It's just a little bit tricky, but it will come eventually. I can feel it moving. And that's what I mean when I was saying earlier, perhaps if you didn't want to see every little detail like this, I could just skip some of that and show you the bit where I take it out. But it's nice to know, isn't it, in advance, where you're likely to have little problems, little difficulties, annoyances and things like that. And that's why I leave them in. That's why the videos are so long. That's why I think when you're making something, it's nice to see every little thing. I know it can be a bit boring though, and I understand that it isn't something that's going to be really awesome to watch. But if you are making these things and you're really interested, and you know, I want to give you every little detail I can, because it might help you. And of course it might help myself if I ever want to refer back to this at any point, because making these things, people do make these things and they do sell them on Etsy and other places like that. I'm probably not going to go quite that far, but it's a possibility. I do sell other things on Etsy, so it's this is where I'm coming from, because I will make a video about the other things I make and sell as I get time to do it. But there is a niche market for these things. And obviously the amount of time and effort that I'm putting into this at the moment it seems a lot when you're watching it on the video, but realistically it was done in a few days, really, if you put it all together, because I didn't do this every day. I didn't work on this all the time. It's just a case of coming back to the workshop every now and again to pick up where I left off. And of course I'm narrating it afterwards. So I've cut a hole, a little flute into that pipe, and that's so that I can get the wire into the pipe safely. I don't want to have it so that the pipe comes under that the wire comes under the pipe, because you might find that it scuffs the wire. So that's why it's slightly higher than the bottom, and it just comes out the top. Now the wire inside the chandelier is going to be this stuff. It's 0.25 millimeter gauge magnet wire, just winding wire. It's quite thin, it's quite strong, but it's not bare copper wire. It's actually coated with a clear kind of plastic, a very thin plastic coating. And that's essential really in this case, because we need to have 2 wires for each arm threaded right into the U-bend of those chandelier arms. And then on the arm of the pole that connects this to the ceiling, whatever that's going to be called, there must be a name for it. I'm going to use these connectors. So that's going to go down the pole and then connect to the wire. So it's going to be something like that, roughly. And I know I should. It's not a standard for this Dolls House stuff. I know they use those 12-volt giant size plugs, don't they, for these things? But I just don't like them. They look so ugly. They look so out of place. So these look a little bit more inconspicuous. So I think I much prefer to use something like this, even though it's not standard. But it's only not standard for the Dolls House. They are standard parts that you can always buy. I intend to have the Dolls House powered by battery as well, so it's not going to be plug-in. I may even do it solar panelled. That might be interesting. But there we are. That's roughly how it's going to be, and I think I'm going to solder this at the end. And I'm going to put another magnet into that ceiling rose so that they'll both attach together, and they're quite strong, so they'll hold a lot. I like the idea of being able to remove these chandeliers and fixtures. From my experience before, I've glued these things in place and they've been permanent fixtures, and then bulbs break and things need replacing and maintenance happen, and it's just an arse. Anyway, back to this bobbin. This is a real pain in the back, because I've got to thread each one of these with copper wire, and as you can imagine, sometimes they don't want to go through the U-bend, which is why it's easier sometimes. It's always easier to thread the copper wire when the pipe is straight. You have no problem doing that. But this way, it is going to be difficult. And as you can see, I've spent quite a bit of time pushing that through. And I've ended up with something like this. It looks crazy, doesn't it, at the moment? And it does. It makes you feel sometimes like, is this worth doing? What on earth am I doing making a tiny little Dolls House chandelier? Is it worth the extra time and effort that I'm doing? Is it really worth doing? And I have to say, it is. I wonder sometimes why I do these things. It's enjoyable to a certain point, but beyond that certain point, it becomes a chore. And this is one of those parts that becomes a chore. But if I was thinking of making this for, say, a product, and I was trying to work out the process and the procedures for each stage, then I would have learnt something from this. I would have learnt that it would be faster to do a straight pipe than a bent pipe, and as you can see, a lot of time has gone into that, and you can see the progress that we've made. That's probably days gone past there. It's looking good so far, even though it doesn't look it. It looks good to me, because I know that it's likely to work, and there we are. That proves that it does work. So I just need to cut these out now and stick it onto the chandelier and solder each LED in place. So I'm just going to try it out every now and again, and see if they work, and that's great. That looks great. That's a good sign. It's always important to try these things as you go, because the further you go down the road, the harder it is for you to backtrack and repair some of this stuff. Now, when you're soldering to this enamelled wire, you do need to heat it up to burn away that enamel, and then sand it with a little bit of sandpaper just to give yourself a clean contact to solder onto. So I've dipped this in a bit of flux, and I'm going to solder an LED onto this now. My soldering iron actually is really quite nice. I got it from eBay. It's quite cheap, and it's a USB, powered by USB, so that's ultra handy, isn't it? So it's portable, and it's quite fast to heat up. It's quite a nice little piece of kit. It's tricky to get these to stick because they're so small, and you can't get your fingers near them when you're soldering. So sometimes I find that I don't quite do a good enough job with the solder, and they need to be redone later. So I'm pulling the wire. This is how I'm holding everything together. So I'm pulling the wire that holds the LED taut, and there's a natural kind of tension because of that U-bend on the arm, and that's what holds everything in place. And there we have it, working fine. So now that I've wired this in, I just need to tighten this up. I need to squeeze them over so that they're clutching this knuckle joint, and then I need to sand that down a little bit and give it a bit of a solder. So I'm just soldering this together now, letting that all drip into there. I have to be careful because underneath this, of course, we've got the big rat's nest of enamelled wire, and I don't want to heat that enamel too much because the wires could short, and that would be a bad time for that to happen. I don't want to have to redo all this. Luckily, those wires are quite far away from that pipe. And there you have it. So essentially I'm using the solder like glue now, and I will probably file this with a small file to a nice shape, a rounded shape. I know the strips there look a little bit ugly, a little bit rough, and I could do a lot to change that really. I could fill that area with solder, just as I'm doing now, or I could place a ring over it, like a copper pipe, a slightly bigger copper pipe, and solder that to it, just to disguise it so you couldn't see it. But I'm happy with the way it's going, and this is as far as I need to go with this, because it is just a one-off, and it's always something I can do at a later stage too. So there we have it. Now I better test this out before I go any further, just in case I've melted them wires. And look, great, apart from one LED is not working there, which is a bit of a pain, but with a bit of an investigation, it turns out that it's just the solder onto the actual LED, the soldering onto the actual LED at the level of the bulb holder wasn't connected, and that's where this eyepiece, the eyeglass there, the magnifying glass, came in, because it's so small to look for these cracks in the solder that That's invaluable, that. So there we have it. It's all finished and it's ready for electroplating. So stick around for the next video, and I hope you enjoyed this one.